but the topic of the taxes and the way in which the different populations in Jerusalem are treated is a very important one, because I'm sure everyone would agree that Jerusalem is one of the core issues that is affecting part of the conflict, because most of the time people are talking constantly about Jerusalem, because obviously it's a very important city, not just for Israel, but for a lot of people around the world. But basically what I was trying to say before, really quickly, and to use you as an example, is when I'm talking about injustices and things like that in the West Bank, to get back to what Rick was saying, I'm trying to sort of say about having an honest discourse, because I want people such as yourself, Noam, to be able to trust international voices or internationals such as myself, where I'm trying to say that I'm trying to look at it in an honest and human rights perspective, so that we can actually have an honest discourse, because I believe in genuine conflict resolution. And for conflict resolution to genuinely take part, you have to follow a certain amount of steps, and it's not always going to be easy. I live in Northern Ireland at the moment, and I don't like comparing different conflict situations, because I believe the conflicts, each individual conflict in the world has its own unique set of circumstances.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. But, yeah.
Do you have any criticism for the Palestinian people for their action in this conflict?
Do I have criticism for the Palestinians? Is that what you're asking? No, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's what he's asking.
That's what he's asking. Of course, I have criticism for the Palestinians. When the recent Human Rights Watch report came out about Palestinian rockets and things like that, I was very happy that the report came out, because it identifies a serious problem. Rockets and the violence against Israelis is something that I take serious issue with, and I fully condemn the firing of rockets and things like that. It's not like a typical, pro-Palestinian activist where you ignore the issues. If you start ignoring issues and you start sort of saying, well, what about the rockets? Well, what about the military? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And you go into what I call circular rhetoric. You can't get any kind of conversation out of it. And so, I fully condemn Palestinian violence. I also condemn Palestinian statements which are, quite frankly, offensive, and so it's important that I get that point across to you, and then maybe we can have an honest discourse. Yeah.
Did you hear my question?
Who? Me or Gary?
No, I asked Rick.
Oh, yes, I did hear your question.
I thought you were asking it to Gary.
All right, who's talking? Is that me?
So Rick, Noam, I'll just try and translate a bit. Rick, Noam asked, do you condemn any Palestinian actions?
No, I didn't ask for condemning, I criticizing.
Right.
So Noam, do you criticize any Palestinian actions? My apologies.
Yeah, I remember the question, and I think that Gary answered the question pretty much the same way I would. Of course I
didn't hear Gary.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay. Well, let me just repeat what I heard Gary say. Of course I have criticisms. I condemn violence in any form. What I would add to what Gary said, though, was that it's not fair to compare violence by a powerful state that really has a lot of control and uses it against a civilian population, to compare that with violence that comes from some of the individuals who are being oppressed and who see no other alternative to violence. I do not think the violence is helpful. I do not think it is morally justified. I condemn that violence, but I can also understand why they think they have no alternative, and I don't think it's helpful at all in solving the problem to try to equate the two. You can't say because they fired a rocket, we have the right to bomb a civilian population and kill 10 for every one person who's injured in Israel.
Just a second, Rick.
Stop, guys, hold on.
Yeah.
Gary, lots of people can't hear you, so you might have to come out of the room and come back in the room. So do you want to just do that so that people can hear you? Because there's also text people who can't hear you. So, cool. Just make sure that happens. So I'm just going to wait till Gary comes back, and then I'm going to make my final comment, and then I'm going to leave the room. And if someone else who's on the text conversation wants to join the room, join the conversation, please feel that they can. So I'm just going to wait for Gary to come back. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. There we go. Gary? 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 I can hear you, Gary, but okay, he's out again. Alright, I'm just gonna, while Gary's sorting himself out, I think that what Rick and Gary are trying to say, this is sort of my concluding remark, is there's an interest amongst those who are looking to resolve the conflict, to have the ability to speak to normal Israelis and ask normal Israelis not to speak hasbara to them. They know a lot of the facts, but to actually have a proper dialogue and say, look, every community has challenges and every country has its problems. And then no one's here trying to delegitimize Israel fundamentally. How can there be a conversation around what realistically is a conflict that involves every Israeli, because every Israeli has to serve in the army? And how can there be a conversation about how the views of the international community about how they view this conflict can be communicated in a way that produces a reaction amongst Israelis of dialogue rather than hasbara? I think that's one of the challenges a lot of people in the international community who care about this conflict and who don't hate Israel and who aren't sitting there trying to judge them from on high are struggling to do at the moment. So my own personal opinion, I've been working. I write for Haaretz. I've been working on my own personal thing about looking for ways that we can move it forward. You can see some of my writings and some stuff that I've written on that. And I want to thank Max and Alex for giving me the opportunity to use Vonvo. I really hope someone takes my place in the conversation. But I think that, no, that's something that Gary and Rick trying to convey. I just wanted to tighten so that you could understand what they were trying to say. So I hope the rest of you have a wonderful rest of the conversation.
Can I check that people can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
No?
I can hear you, but very loud. Can you turn down the mic a little bit?
It's very loud.
Yeah, very loud.
Sorry, I tried to compensate for my inadequacies. Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's fine.
So now that you can hear me, I wanted to sort of say again what I was trying to say before, but Joel outlined it quite well. It's about, for me, having an honest discourse, and that's not to say that it's not to say that we can't criticize and sort of condemn things, but it's important to be able to sort of say that, for example, when you ask me the question, do I condemn, or when you ask the question in general to various people, do you condemn the wrongs on the Palestinian side of things? Yes, of course, it's important to condemn and criticize those actions and acts of violence. You know, in the recent, in November, a friend of a friend was on the bus which was attacked in Tel Aviv. You know, there are people who I know who are affected by these crimes, right? But at the same time, it's
Gary, I have just to say I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have to say something about the bus. The man that put the bomb in the bus was not a Palestinian from the West Bank or Gaza. He was he considered himself Palestinian, but he's a citizen of Israel that work in McDonald's in the middle of Israel and work, study, and get all the rights. And he did put a bomb in a bus, not to kill soldier, to kill citizen. So
yeah. Yeah, I think about it, and here's something for you to think about. Not that, and again, not that I'm comparing. I don't like comparing conflicts because different conflicts around the world have their own unique set of circumstances. But I'm sitting here in Northern Ireland right now. I'm a member of a political party in Northern Ireland which is currently having death threats put against us. There was a bomb thrown at the police the other day. There are various different things which are happening all over the world, which are being done by people who are citizens of our own communities, who are part of our own countries. And I think that it's important not to extrapolate the idea or ideology of one violent act and try to say that that an entire group of people are to blame. When you're talking about those kinds of things, when you're talking about putting a bomb on a bus, that person who put the bomb on the bus and maybe the group that he belonged to or didn't belong to or whatever is responsible for that violent act. But the thing that I'm trying to make clear is that during all of that, and whilst there was violence and rockets being launched on Tel Aviv and various other different things, a lot of Palestinians were killed, including entire families, by the Israeli military. The Israeli military is a state organization which is part of the Israeli establishment, and the Israeli military do what the Israeli government tell them to do. And that's a serious thing that people should look at, because I don't think it's right for any military to target or disproportionately attack areas of concentrated civilian population. And just as it's wrong for Palestinians,
I just want to make it clear. The IDF is not targeting civilians. It's such a incorrect. You said it, and before you, I forgot his name. The other guy said it, and it's just doesn't truth. I think some high-ranking officer from the UK said that the IDF is doing everything that he can to prevent casualties in civilian population, but Hamas is taking advantage of this situation to hide, to use the civilian population as human shield. Okay. Putting a rocket launcher inside the house of the family, and the Apache helicopter pilot needed to make the call, shut down the rocket, or let the rocket shoot inside the Israel and harm civilian. It's a tough call. I tell the truth, I don't know what I would do in this situation. And think about it too, okay? But the IDF does not targeting civilian. We do everything we can. Believe me, I was in the army. I can tell you, we do everything we can. We calling people houses, announcing them that we're going to take this area, get out of the house. You don't understand how much of.
Well, actually, I do understand. I have friends who are currently in the IDF, and I've spent a lot of time dialoguing with people who are in the IDF. I understand some of the positions and some of the issues, but here's the thing for me, okay? There is international law, and looking at it from a human rights perspective, okay? You cannot justify indiscriminately attacking areas of civilian concentrated population just to get at a terrorist, and here's why, okay? In any other place in the Western world, and I'm using the Western world because Israel likes to compare itself to the Western world a lot, okay? So let's take Northern Ireland for an example, where I am right now, okay? There are, in Northern Ireland right now, people who are terrorists, okay? That's an undeniable fact. There was somebody who was caught with a rocket launcher about 2.5 weeks ago, and he was planning to use that rocket launcher in some kind of attack, right? However, in Northern Ireland, the British military, whereas, yes, it's done a lot of terrible things in the past, and the police have done a lot of terrible things in the past, and there's an entire controversial conflict to talk about. In Northern Ireland, if the police were to target an entire area of populated people just to get at a group of terrorists, the public in Northern Ireland would not accept that. They would not accept the deaths of civilians just to get at terrorists. Civilian death has to be something which is completely condemned by people who are human rights oriented. Which means that when Hamas fired the rockets which killed the three Israelis, in November, I condemned that. And it's the same when, and I ask people to also look at the seriousness of the situation and say what the Israeli military are doing in Gaza and what the Israeli military do around the clock in the West Bank and various other places.
So what are you suggesting for response for the rockets?
Well, that's the thing, because I don't always have the answers, and I'm happy to hold my hand up and say that I don't always have the answer, and it's a very difficult question.
Look at the situation. 7 years of rockets. 7 years of rockets. 1 million citizens under fire for 7 years. You have 15 to 30 seconds to run to the shelter. Tell me, as a government, what is the answer for your citizens, the chosen? What do you need to do? If some group in France decide to launch rockets at London from the French side, what happened? What England will do?
Well, in this day and age, if someone in France decided to launch rockets against another country in Europe, they wouldn't start a war over it. They certainly wouldn't start killing innocent civilians just because of people firing rockets.
So you think? Wait. Yeah, no. You said something very, very bad. You said that we are punishing because they are firing at us rockets. So we are punishing the civilian. We are targeting civilian. No, we are trying to put an end. We do. You have in one side a side that targeting civilian on purpose, the Hamas, okay? And the other side, you have a side that the obligation of his leadership is to defend the citizen of this country, and he do whatever he can to not to harm a civilian population, to harm the one responsible. But they hiding in a very crowded civilian population.
Again,
so how can you even compare? It's like you don't get the fact right. Okay, think about it.
Let's talk about it honestly here. Okay.
When I see on television a baby.
Wait, let's take turns here, okay? If I was in the position, I would still say that any time where civilian death is becoming higher and higher is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. That's that. And so instead of
soldier death is acceptable.
So instead of escalating violence, there are other options which need to be explored. Because
like what?
Well, there's
we try to ignore it for 7 years. We try to ignore it.
You didn't ignore it. There was Catholic-led. There's been various military. After 4. Okay. So. Now we get back into what I call circular rhetoric. Just hold on a second, because we're going to go back and forth and start comparing military operations with rocket fire, and we go back and forward. That's not the way to solve conflict. We're looking for answers here. We're not looking to point fingers and blame people. Right? I'm not going to start blaming. I'm not going to start saying that, what about this, or how about this, and after this, and who started this, and who started that. The fact of the matter is that the violence is wrong, the civilian deaths are wrong, and there's a key word here: accountability. Okay, people who are responsible for civilian deaths need to be people who are responsible for civilian deaths need to be held accountable. People who are responsible for civilian deaths, innocent civilian deaths, regardless of what side they're on, need to be held responsible and accountable for the criminal acts that they've committed, and that's without.
Okay, so I'm asking. Okay, so I'm asking, where was the international community for 7 years?
Well,
When
for
they shot
7 years,
rockets?
in the past
Where?
7 years, and believe me, I've been.
Where is the action? Where is the action against Hamas? Where is the UN resolution against Hamas? Where is it? You know why we have such lowest casualties in the Israeli side? You know why? You know why? Because the government put a lot of money in shelters and put a lot of money in defense system, because the government works for the citizen.
Mm.
And this is the responsibility of the government.
The UN has condemned the terrorist actions of these organizations. The international community has condemned the actions of these organizations. Just recently in November, my government in England, the British government, condemned the actions of Hamas unequivocally and said that the violence needs to stop. There is condemnation from the international community about these crimes, right? However, we're not moving. We need to move forward on this. That's again. I'll repeat what I'm trying to say. We need to move forward on this.
In Hamas case, I suggest you go to learn about Hamas. Who is Hamas? What they are offering, and then we can talk about it. Because I don't think you know who is Hamas is. You
do realize though that there are literally, I think I could count about 15 organizations operating in Gaza right now who aren't anything to do with Hamas, who are also.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because Hamas is responsible.
They can't possibly control the Gaza Strip.
Hamas was chosen. You said don't blame them because you say they can't control them. They chose from their own people.
I'm not saying don't blame them. No, wait. I'm not saying don't blame them.
Hamas is.
Take us a step back. I don't blame.
Gary, let's do it step by step, okay? Step one.
I do not blame every single Israeli citizen for the actions of the state of Israel, and you should not blame. And you should not blame the Palestinians for every single action that Hamas takes, because because you can't blame and then you can't blanket an entire population with the blame of the actions of individual groups. When you're talking about a country, when you're talking about Israel, then you can talk about the people taking action to say to their government that what they're doing is wrong. But in the Palestinian territories, the idea that Palestinians have even the slightest control of their lives is completely ludicrous. The Palestinians do not have control of their lives. They don't even have control over their own government. Hamas brutally took over the Gaza Strip in 2006 using violence. Don't shake your head, because you know for a fact that Hamas murdered members of the opposition parties. You know
I want to respond. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, hi Chloe, how are you? Chloe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Fine. I'm just responding to Gary about what he said. Gary, let's go step by step. Are you agree that Hamas is a terror organization?
Yes, I believe that Hamas is a terror organization, and I condemn their actions.
Okay. Do you know that Hamas was elected in a democratic election in Gaza Strip?
I know that Hamas won an election by 1.4%, where less than 1.5 million of the population took part in the election, and that Hamas also did not win the majority of seats in the Gaza Strip. The entire 4 seats that were in Rafah were won by Fatah. And if you want to really analyze the Palestinian elections in 2006, you can say that the actual elections, the actual voting, was democratic. But what happened immediately after the elections certainly wasn't democratic. And Hamas have outstayed any kind of mandate that they thought they might have had, the same as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And so there's actually no democracy currently in the Palestinian territories at all. And so to try and suggest that Palestinians are to blame because Hamas are using violence.
I'm sorry, Gary, I just wanted a short answer, okay?
No, because if you want to have a proper conversation, you need to look at the complexity. Now,
I understand. I understand, but it doesn't get us anywhere, okay? I just want to respond a little bit. So you said that Hamas they have an election. Hamas won or didn't won, but he took Gaza by force. Yes.
They took Gaza by force. It was in the news.
So they took. Yeah. It was very intense over there. They start shooting the PLO everywhere. The PLO members start to run into Israel, and Israeli soldiers save them. But never mind this. So if you said Hamas took over Gaza by force, took Gaza people as hostage. So why are you not fighting for free Gaza from Hamas? This make no sense. To free the people of Gaza that are not guilty of the situation from Hamas, from the problematic thing.
No. Okay.
Why?
Okay, wait. No. Okay, let me answer that. Okay. I certainly do think that the Gaza Strip needs to be freed from Hamas, but the Gaza Strip also needs to be freed from the siege and the occupation, the same as the West Bank needs to be freed from the occupation. Though that is the bigger picture and the more complex picture, which you're ignoring by saying that very simple statement. You're ignoring the wider issue of the occupation. Okay, and that's simple.
Gary, I have a question. How is a siege occupation?
Well,
last I checked, a siege is an act of war. And when there's a state of war, a siege is an appropriate measure that can be taken.
Okay. Again, good point. A state of war, right? It's a state of war when it suits Israel, when it wants to use that term, and then it goes straight back to a conflict when Israel doesn't want to use that term. If you want to start using rhetoric and start saying it's a state of war or it's not a state of war and things like that, then we get into a whole different game, right? If you're talking about it being a state of war, who is Israel at war with? You can't be at war with a non-entity. Gaza is not a country. The people of Gaza don't have
something as a country. They have their own government. They have their own self-orders.
No, they don't. They don't have their own democratic. They don't have their own democratic rules. In Gaza, they use the shekel. In Gaza, they use the shekel. They don't have their own economy. In Gaza, they use the shekel.
They don't have their own economy. I'm baffled by this.
Yes, I'm serious. No.
So do people go to work?
In Gaza, they're forced to use the shekel because the occupation is still very present there.
Hold on. An occupation entails soldiers being on the ground there, occupying the territory.
Soldiers invade Gaza all the time, routinely.
No, they don't.
Yes, I have a friend who's. I have several Israeli friends who work with various news agencies who are on the Gaza border quite often and who have seen and follow all of the incursions that happen.
Can you name one? Because I was there, I was on the border there, and in fact the orders were the IDF isn't allowed to cross over the border. So I'm baffled by what you're saying because there is specific orders given. You are not allowed to cross over the fence.
Yes, and I'm aware of the IDF's orders, but on the official record. However,
so you're saying that they violate their orders. You're saying they violate their orders and that the people who violate the orders that are the initiative of the government are now the will of the people.
I'm saying that the orders which you're quoting are ignored by the Israeli government when it suits them. They order the Israeli army into Gaza quite regularly, and it's all documented facts. Let's look at I don't know, June 2012 or July 2012. I'm looking for dates and things right now. On Or even more recently, November 14th, Israeli forces launched, not the 14th, we'll look at the weekend before. When you look at the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza, or even the week before that, you can find all of these documents in human rights reports. Okay? Now, I'm having to skim read here. I'm having to skim read here because it's very, you're bringing up things like this.
Hold on, when you're saying the IDF went in, I just want to understand what you're saying. Are you saying that the soldiers actually went in, or there was an incursion and they were shooting across the border? Because those are two very different things. You do understand that, right?
Well, I fully understand that those are two very different things.
And to say that it's an occupation when there's shooting going on across the border.
Well, an occupation is there, whether you like it or not. The international community call it an occupation. The international community recognize it. The entire world, including my British government and the American government, recognize it as an occupation. Okay, so you're
okay. Wait. I'm just gonna go along with this. So if that's an occupation, then what the Saudis are doing to Yemen is an occupation.
Perhaps I'd have to look into it. I don't know anything about Saudi Arabia and Yemen because I don't.
No one says that. No one even addresses that.
I'll give you an example of where it is an occupation, and that's the Morocco and the Western Sahara. That's an occupation, and that's recognized. Yeah, well, exactly. You're bringing up irrelevant topics to try and obvious. You're bringing up irrelevant topics.
Trying to understand what an occupation is.
Let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about Israel and Palestine. The topic of the conversation is Israeli and Palestinian.
What's an occupation? What do you define as an occupation?
An occupation when a military is belligerently occupying territories which are recognized as not belonging to that sovereign state.
You're using the word in the definition.
Yeah,
what is the definition of an occupation?
I just defined it for you.
No, you just defined occupation is when one country occupies another. That doesn't define anything. It's actually very useless. It's a circular definition and tells us nothing.
No, it's very useful because I'm using the legal definition of occupation. And it's quite clear that the international community, the International Court of Justice, and various other groups acknowledge that what Israel is doing is an occupation. So denying that the occupation exists is just taking us further and further away from any real dialogue on the conflict.
The international community also just gave non-observer status to an organization, the PLO, which calls daily not only the annihilation of Israel, but also for the death of Jews. I don't think that the international community has the greatest records when it comes to defining what is and what isn't. And it tends to, because it's funny, because the people who have written up the very resolutions that we cite when we defend ourselves, when we say that Israel is not occupying, are the same people who wrote resolutions like Resolution 242 and it's funny because the entity seems to have amnesia when it comes to these issues, because the very same people who wrote Resolutions 242 and things of that nature have stated that Israel is not occupying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and yet we forget those things and we only cite Resolution 242 and not the spirit of said resolutions, which I find interesting. But when you were talking about Hamas and you were saying, what were you saying earlier about that you can't blame the Palestinian people for Hamas? Was that what you were saying earlier?
The same way that you can't blame the entire Israeli population for the actions of the Israeli government. And you said several things in that statement, in what you just said there, and a lot of falsehoods. The PLO, for example, rescinded the calls to annihilate Israel in 1988.
Really? Just a couple days ago, they came out with a logo, and the entire state, the so-called state of Palestine.
A logo, yes, of course. How silly of me to forget that a logo automatically means that all the Palestinians must want to annihilate Israel. You can talk about a logo. You can talk about a logo. You can talk about a logo. You can talk about a logo, everyone. If you're not going to have a serious conversation about how to genuinely move forward, This is the thing. You have to have a serious conversation about how to generally move forward. I can go on the Israeli government website right now, where they label the entire area of the state of Israel. That's on the agricultural section of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You know, we can bring up point after point to try and bash each other with all we like, but that doesn't bring forward any proper discourse on the thing. And if you're going to deny that an occupation is happening,
no one's saying, Gary, wait a second.
You know, Jerry, every time.
We just want to know what it is that you define as occupation. You've said the definition given is this: is that it's when one country belligerently occupies another. I don't know what that means. To me, to be occupied, I'm occupying this seat right now, which means I am physically in this seat. Now, if that's what you mean by occupy, and I think that's what in English it means, then I don't understand how you can call what's going on in Gaza occupation. If you have a different definition of occupy, then
what's happening in Gaza? Israel has no control over all space. They have incursions almost daily with military weapons into Gaza. Yes, into the Gaza Strip, into their airspace, into their airspace. Yes, there's drones flying over Gaza right now.
Do you have any idea how drones work? That's actually wrong. You're actually wrong on this. The drones, in order to do their recon, do not need to be over their territory. It's actually triangulated.
Then why does Israel send them into the Gaza Strip?
They're firing over here. I'm trying to
Then why is it that every single night, just scores of Palestinians go to sleep hearing drones and various other things flying overhead?
Gary, are you serious? You're talking about sleeping problem?
Hold on, no, relax. No, relax.
No. I have friends in southern Israel too. I have friends in southern Israel too. I'm fully aware.
I can hear planes going over my head every single night when I go to sleep. I'm missing the point here that they hear planes. I hear it every night, and frankly, you can hear a plane, a jet from miles away. A drone is propelling a plane. To hear it, it needs to be like within about 2 feet of you.
Here's the fact.
By the way, the drones are flying very high to avoid the machine gun fire. Okay.
No, let's look at the fact.
And drones are not propelled by jet engines; they're propelled by the propeller engines.
Propellers. They're propeller planes that you can't hear from that high.
Let's look at verifiable.
But excuse me, Gary. I don't give a shit about the sleeping problem.
Please let me finish.
No, that's irrelevant. Let him finish.
Alright, let's talk about verifiable facts, and this links into the flying of military equipment over Gaza, right? In Sderot right now, about 93% of children who are living in Sderot have post-traumatic stress syndrome, or thereabouts, because of the rockets which are fired into that town on a weekly basis. That's a horrifying thing, and it needs to be resolved, and the rockets need to be stopped. In Gaza, over 80% of children in certain areas of the Gaza Strip are traumatized because of the bombs which are falling on Gaza, and because of the helicopters which fly over their schools every day, and because of the drones which fly over Gaza. Those children, all of those children, no matter whether they're Palestinian or Israeli, are suffering a serious condition because of the ongoing conflict. And yet, you guys, they seem to be bothered about what's happening to the Israelis. You're not bothered about what's happening to Palestinians.
I'm worried about both sides. I can't believe this.
Look for excuses. Hamas are hiding there, or there are terrorists hiding there. There's a rocket launcher there. You look for excuses for why you can justify, rather than condemn.
So it's unjustified to. Israelis have no right to do anything to protect their citizens. As you said, the rockets need to stop. Now, they are not. Hamas is not stopping them. The Israeli army has no right to protect itself.
Israelis have every right to protect itself. But there's a difference between protecting yourself and attacking civilians and causing civilians.
When have they attacked civilians? One instance where they specifically the target was a civilian target. One instance where it was a civilian target, not a military. The target was
indiscriminate targeting.
There's never
Well,
been any
there's-
indiscriminate
okay,
targeting,
Israel-
and there's
okay,
no,
let's take
there's
an
no
example.
evidence to
Let's
prove
take
that.
another verifiable fact. Let's take another verifiable fact. In the last assault on Gaza in November, Netanyahu himself and the defense minister admitted that Israel has the capability to perform surgical strikes against targets in Gaza. Okay, if Israel can perform surgical strikes to targets in Gaza, why then the civilian death toll so high? And why was an entire family?
Do you know what a surgical precision is with the targeting? Do you have any idea what that is when you talk about military?
Yeah, I do. I have a fair view. I have people who are in the military. I have
Oh,
friends
wait,
in the
so
military.
what is it? If you have
I have to say,
I also
Gary, please, I just, Brad, I don't know.
because we're doing all propaganda now instead of having a genuine conversation.
Can I-
So
No, Gary, I just want to ask you one question. Have you been in a combat zone?
yes, I have. Many times.
You've been in a combat zone.
I've even been shot in the shoulder by a rubber bullet from the military. But still, I don't have any problem with them. I don't hate them. I don't have any anger towards them. But yeah, I've been in combat zones. I have been, and I've been in touch with people who are in the military. I've been.
What's surgical precision?
I don't know. Wait. I mean a real combat zone. Not doing posters and getting jiggle or something. A real combat zone. If you've been, you know that it's a complete chaos. A complete chaos. And mistakes have been done.
No, stop. It's irrelevant. He's talking about version to Gaza.
Having complete chaos is no excuse for harming civilians. Or I could go to East Belfast right now and it's in complete chaos because there were gunmen trying to shoot at people 2 nights ago.
If one of those gunmen grabs a
And
bunch
if one
of
of those-
civilians
if one of those-
and puts them around him as human shields, what are
then the police would not fire on that. The police would not fire on that gunman because the police value civilian rights.
The police.
Because
Wait, stop.
well, the military
Police and your army have two different
would not. I have faith in my military that they would not target indiscriminately towards a gunman if they were in amongst
Well, I
areas
know
of
the United States military does. I know
And
that.
I think that's immoral.
I know
And
the
I think
United
it's
States
immoral
military.
to.
No,
I
because the
think it's
job of
immoral to
soldiers is
allow
to protect
people to
its.
kill. I think it's immoral to allow people to find excuses for killing civilians in that manner. The civilian death tolls of various
Yes,
conflicts around the world.
I'm agreeing that it's wrong that this happened, but who is to blame for the use of human shields? Who is morally
The person who fires the
when
bullet.
someone takes a human shield?
The person or the military that fires the bullet is to blame. Which is
That's
why.
actually a ridiculous point. So someone's
No,
violating
it's
rules
a
of law.
ridiculous
Wait,
point. And the truth and
It's
justice
because it's a
forums
violation.
and the investigations, the truth and justice forums and the investigations that happen into military acts years later quite often prove these facts. For example, again, and I'll make it clear, I don't like comparing conflicts because each conflict is a unique situation. I want to make that fact clear. But in Northern Ireland, the military committed several seriously destructive and horrible things against civilian people. And they had investigations. They've had the Bloody Sunday investigation. They've had investigations about these military actions. And in each one, they've been forced to apologize, and also in some, I think, 1 or 2 cases, they've had to punish people. And they've had, because that's what accountability is called. And that's where you guys are missing. You guys are missing a serious point. Is that if you want to genuinely resolve conflicts, there are a lot of steps that have to be taken, and instead of going around in a circle, you have to take a serious step. I'm trying, and I'm being polite here. I'm not trying to accuse any of you guys of anything or anything like that. But we need to have a serious conversation. And I've repeated myself several times. There needs to be this kind of conversation. I appreciate having dialogue.
So what do you think?
For a start, right? Then again, going back to the point about occupation, there is an occupation, and you've asked me to define occupation. I've tried to define it several times to you. Israel is actively on the ground in the West Bank, occupying that territory. Israel has full control of the Gaza Strip under international law and under the various.
Wait, what about Rafah?
No, listen.
What about the Rafah crossing? Wait, what about the Rafah crossing? Who's controlling that?
Egypt under an agreement with Israel.
Oh, so wait. So you just admitted now that Gaza is not under complete control of Israel. You said Egypt's not
Israel
controlling
controls. if I want to go to Gaza right now, I have to apply through the Egyptians, who then send my name and my details to Israel, who then have to approve it for transit. I have to be approved to go into Gaza. The same as people who are exiting the Gaza Strip via Rafah. That's a lot of that is called the coordination, because that's in the peace agreement
there's some
between
coordination between the two countries. So you just said there are two occupiers.
And Israel has the control.
There's the Egyptians. Wait. There's Egypt and
in the past, before Egypt was taken over by a lunatic, all right. Before Egypt was taken over by a lunatic. Sorry, before Egypt was taken over by a lunatic.
By the way, the same lunatics that created Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, so think about Hamas as the little baby of the Muslim Brotherhood that we just call lunatic. Okay?
Yeah,
I didn't hear you blaming. I didn't hear you, Gary. I didn't blame you.
Where's the push to deal with these groups, though? Where's the genuine push to deal with them? I'm not talking about trying to annihilate them. I'm not talking about trying to kill them. Where's the push to try and actually make not only those groups maybe question themselves, but also make the people surrounding those groups and the people who might fall in line with those groups sometimes challenge them? There's no dialogue there to try and sort of push things. There are a lot of people in Egypt.
There's good reason for this. Let me ask you a question. Now, if you have a governing body that calls for the destruction of its opposition, you want the opposition to sit there and come to the negotiating table, think that it's going to be productive in any way, shape, or form, when their goal is to conquer all of Israel. That's Hamas's goal, to get rid of Israel.
Again, let's look at this.
Point? I'm with you.
Okay. Listen. Okay, let's again, to make it clear, not that I'm comparing conflicts, but let's look at how serious and how difficult conflict resolution can be. Right, in Northern Ireland, right, there were groups who were completely, and there are groups who still are completely committed to the destruction of Northern Ireland as Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, and yet, at the Good Friday Agreement, when the Good Friday Agreement came around, those groups sat together and negotiated a settlement, and they managed to bring forward a peace process that has been one of the most successful peace processes around the world. Right?
Okay, but there's only one problem with that. That's a great model, except Hamas refuses to recognize the existence of the state of Israel, nor do they want it to sit down and have a rational discussion. So we're talking about apples and oranges here.
In which case, there needs to be a serious look at the social side of things in terms of in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Because if you look at the society in those places, there are certain things which can be done to try and challenge the way in which people think in those communities, and allow them to get rid of Hamas legitimately without having to kill people, without having to have a violent uprising or any of those kinds of things. Because I've spent a lot of time in the West Bank, and I know for a fact that a lot of people in the West Bank, for example, contrary to all of the news and the various other different things that get put out, a lot of people in the West Bank find the ideology of Hamas absolutely repulsive. Right?
Yes,
and there are also a lot of people.
Hate PLO.
There's also people, hundreds of thousands of people in the Gaza Strip who despise the ideology of Hamas, but because of the oppression that Hamas and Israel collectively bring on those people, right?
It's I don't know if that's collective oppression there. I think your first statement was right.
Collective oppression. Let's look at the oppression that Hamas.
They have them under oppression.
Hamas have them under oppression, but then it's layer upon layer of oppression. It's layer upon layer of oppression, because you have the oppression that Hamas brings, and then you have the overall oppression, which is to a certain extent.
What do the Israelis
the siege on the Gaza Strip. Here's a key question for you guys. Okay. Is it more or less difficult to regulate the flow of arms into a territory by having genuine control over and making use of proper border points instead of besieging an entire area and making it possible for them to use tunnels and things like that? Because let's look at this seriously. There's been a siege on Gaza for a long time. There's been
what you're suggesting is that the Israelis
I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, just wait. Let me finish my point.
I didn't understand.
There's been
I wanted to clarify this first statement that you said.
Okay, but I'm adding to the point. I'm adding to the point before you answer.
I didn't
Okay,
understand the first one.
I'm adding to the point. Okay, you have to look at this. Israel has been in control of most of the borders around Gaza for a very long time, and yet there are still weapons getting in through tunnels and through smuggling and things like that, right? And so